Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read S5 5042 Magic Treehouse number 25, 26, chapter 6 through chapter 10. Chapter 6. Good morning, Gorilla. The pounding ended. There was silence, long silence. Jack opened his eyes. He peeked around the tree. The silverback was sitting on the ground. His lips were curved in a smile. He looked pleased with himself. Was his whole act a fake? Jack wondered. Jack didn't know whether to be scared or to laugh. The only thing he did know was he still had to get to Annie. Jack pulled out the research book. He found the gorilla chapter again. He read, "To safely get close to gorilla in the wild, it's wise to act like a gorilla yourself. Crouch down and rest on your knuckles like a gorilla. Keep your head down and act friendly." Jack packed up his research book. He put his pack on his back. Then he went down on his knees. Jack took a deep breath. He smiled a friendly smile, pressing down on his knuckles. He moved out from behind the tree. His fingers hurt as he walked on them. The silverback grunted. Jack didn't look up. He kept smiling, a friendly smile, as he crawled through the brush toward the clearing. When he got to the edge of the clearing, he glanced back. The giant gorilla was following him. He was frowning, but he didn't seem about to attack. Jack kept going. He moved into the clearing, then he stopped. More gorillas were waking up. A large gorilla hugged Boo Boo as if to comfort her. When Boo Boo saw Jack, she screeched joyfully. All the other gorillas turned to look at him. They made nervous sounds. Jack's heart pounded, but he just smiled his friendly smile and kept crawling. He crawled around the gorillas and over to Annie. "Wake up," he said, shaking her. Annie yawned, then opened her eyes. "Oh, hi," she said. "Are you okay?" asked Jack. "Sure," she said. She sat up and looked around. She gasped. The gorillas were staring at Jack and Annie with bright, darting eyes. The silverback stared the hardest. "Oh, wow," said Annie. A joyful smile crossed her face. Good morning, gorillas. Chapter 7, Eating Out. Annie kept smiling. At the gorillas. "Wow," she said. "Wow, wow, wow. Didn't you know you were sleeping next to them?" Jack asked. "No," she said. "When you didn't come back, Boob let me hear, but I couldn't see anything. It was too dark." Just then Boob left her mother's arms and bounded over to Annie. She climbed into Annie's lap and hugged her. Another small gorilla left his mother and ran over to Annie too. He was about the size of a 2-year-old kid. "Ho, ho," he said. He gave Annie a playful poke. "Ho, ho yourself," said Annie. "Is Ho, ho your name?" She tickled Ho, ho. She tickled Boo, Boo too. The two small gorillas made laughing sounds and fell onto their backs. The two mother gorillas laughed too. "Ha, ha, ha," they said. Jack felt a little jealous. He wanted the gorillas to like him as well, but he didn't know how to join in the fun. So he just sighed and pulled out his notebook. He added to his gorilla behavior list, The gorillas liked to tickle and laugh. Suddenly he heard a low growl. He looked up. The silverback had moved closer to him. He was glaring. The big guy doesn't understand what you're doing. And he called to Jack. He's never seen anyone take notes before. Jack quickly put his notebook away. The giant gorilla huffed. Then he turned to his family and gave a short bark. The gorillas began lining up behind the silverback. The baby trembled in his mother's arms. Ho-Ho trembled on his mother's back. Boo-Boo and Annie held hands. They all followed the silverback out of the clearing. Come on, Annie called to Jack. Let's go with the big guy and the gang. Jack shook his head. I don't think they want me to come along, he said. Boo-Boo screeched at Jack. She held out her free hand to him. Boo-Boo wants you, said Annie. Jack smiled shyly. He took Boo-Boo's small warm hand. Then he walked with Annie and the gorillas out of the clearing. On their ramble through the cloud forest, the gorillas found food everywhere. They munched flowers and ferns and leaves. They swallowed and burped. They munched twigs and branches and pieces of bark and bamboo. They swallowed and burped as the gorillas ate breakfast. It started to rain again, but they didn't seem to mind. Annie didn't seem to mind either. She and Boo-Boo played tag in the drizzly woods. They ran around the trees, laughing and screeching. Jack tried to follow them, but he gave up. He was tired and cold. Shivering, he stood under a mossy tree to keep dry. While he was alone, Jack sneaked his notebook out of his pack. He made a new list. Gorilla foods, flowers, ferns, leaves, twigs, bark, branches, bamboo. As he rode, he heard a low growl. He looked up. Big Eye had spotted him. The silverback was standing close by. He was frowning at Jack, his lips tucked in a tight line. Sorry, said Jack. He quickly put away his notebook. Big Eye kept frowning. Jack quickly tried to act like a gorilla. He went down on all fours. He tore off the leaf of a plant. He took a bite. It tasted bitter, like a vinegar. Jack pretended to munch and swallow and burp. Big Eye huffed, then moved on. As soon as he was gone, Jack spat out the leaf. Yuck, 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 he said, wiping his tongue. Jack felt the tap on his back. He jumped, but it was just Ho-Ho. The small gorilla offered him a twig to eat. Oh no, thanks, Ho-Ho, said Jack. Ho-Ho kept holding out the twig. Oh, okay, said Jack, politely taking it. I'll eat it later. He put the twig into his backpack. Ho-Ho's mom came over to Jack. She held some berries to his lips. No thanks, Jack said. The gorilla stared at him with a sad look. Oh, okay, said Jack. He opened his mouth, and Ho-Ho's mom fed him the berries. Jack munched the berry. To his surprise, they tasted good. He swallowed, then burped just like a gorilla. This time, he wasn't pretending. Bubba's mom then came over to Jack. She offered him some rainwater from a cupped plant. Jack was very thirsty. He sipped the water. It tasted fresh and cold. Bubba's mom took Jack's hand in her white hand. She led him through the forest to Annie and Bubba. Bubba screeched happily. When she saw Jack, she threw her furry arms around him. Hi, we missed you, Annie said to Jack. Are you having fun? Jack smiled and nodded. Actually, he was having fun now. He didn't mind the rain so much anymore. He didn't feel so left out. Some of the gorillas really seemed to like him, he thought. They seemed to like him a lot. Chapter 8. A Special Language. The rain ended. Slowly, the feeding came to a stop. Big Eye led his family into a clearing. The tall grass sparkled with misty sunlight. The silverback lay down and tucked his arms under his head. The other gorillas gathered around him. Some beat the grasses until they were flat. Ho-Ho's mom made a bed of wheat stalks for Ho-Ho. The Bubba's mom made a bed of leaves for Bubba. Then she made 2 extra beds for Jack and Annie. They lay down with all the gorillas to take their nap. Jack used his backpack for a pillow. Lying on his leafy bed, Jack watched the mother of the baby gorilla groom her small baby. The mother parted his hair and searched through it, picking at its skin now and then. The baby soon wiggled free and crawled around in the grass. His mother gazed and rested on Annie. She moved over to Annie and gently grabbed one of her pigtails. She studied it carefully. "What are you doing?" Annie asked. "She's looking for bugs, I think," said Jack. "Oh, yuck," said Annie, sitting up. Jack laughed. Just then the baby's mother reached for him. "Oops. No thanks, no bugs on me," he said, and he sat up too. The mother gorilla lay back in the grass and closed her eyes. Her baby crawled over to Annie. "Hi, little guy," Annie said tenderly. She picked up the baby and stroked his head. The baby smiled at her and closed his eyes. While all the gorillas napped, Jack sneaked the book out of his pack. He found the gorilla chapter. He read softly to Annie. The gorillas are very smart. A captive gorilla named Coco has even learned the sign language. Sign language is a special language used by people who cannot hear. Coco can say, "What?" Annie said loudly. "Sign language? A special language?" A voice woke Bubba and Ho-Ho. They sat up and rubbed their eyes. "So," said Jack. "Morgan's secret rhyme," said Annie. "Don't you remember?" She repeated the rhyme. "To find a special kind of magic in the worlds so far apart, speak a special language. Talk with your hand and heart." "Oh, yeah," said Jay. "I even know a little sign language," said Annie. "In school, we learned how to sign 'I love you.'" Annie held up a closed hand slowly. She lifted her thumb, index finger, and little finger. She showed the sign to Boo Boo and Ho Ho. "I love you," she said slowly. The small gorillas looked curious. Jack made the sign too. "I love you," he said to Boo Boo and Ho Ho. The little gorillas stared at Annie and Jack. Then both of them held up their hands. They tried to make the same sign. "They love us too," said Annie. "Wow," said Jack. He glanced over at Big Guy. The silverback's eyes were open. He was watching them. Jack quickly closed the book. To his relief, the giant gorilla turned over. "Well," Annie said with a sigh, "I guess that does it. We spoke a special language," said Jack. "We talked with our..." Before he could finish his sentence, the Bubba pushed him. "Whoa," said Jack. Ho-Ho held his little arms above his head. He reared back and charged at Jack. With a flying tackle, he knocked Jack over. "What's going on?" said Jack. "They want to play with you," said Annie. The Bubba jumped on Jack and put him in a headlock. Jack broke free from the 2 small gorillas. He jumped up and dashed into the forest. Bubba and Ho-Ho charged after him. Annie carried the little guy and followed. She laughed as the small gorillas looked for Jack. Jack hid behind the tree. He pushed his glasses into place. He waited for Bubba. In a moment, she walked by. "Boo!" Jack shouted, jumping out. Boo Boo screeched and leaped straight up in the air. Jack cracked up laughing. Boo Boo didn't laugh, though. She bit her lip. She hid her face behind her hands. "Oh, Bubba," said Annie. "Don't be scared." She gently put the baby on the ground. She reached out to comfort Boo Boo. The Boo Boo wrapped her arms around Annie's neck. She buried her furry head in Annie's shoulder. "Jack was just playing," said Annie. Bubba raised her head. She looked at Jack over Annie's shoulder. "Friend?" he asked softly. Bubba stuck a tongue out at him. Jack laughed. Bubba showed her teeth in a big smile. Friends, said Jack. Just then Ho-Ho started screeching. Jack and Annie looked around. Ho-Ho was pointing into the bushes. Where's the little guy? Said Annie. She and Jack dashed around the shrubs. The baby had crawled to a tree. He was looking up at a branch. A huge, sleek cat with black fur was sitting on the branch. His pale green eyes stared down at the baby gorillas. He looked hungry. A black leopard? Breathed Jack. The leopard leaped lightly down from his perch. He faced the little guy. The baby looked scared. No, cried Annie. She ran over to the baby gorilla and scooped him into her arms. The leopard let out a snarl. He lowered his head and started slowly toward Annie and the baby. Jack panicked. He didn't know what to do at first, and he remembered Big Guy's act. Jack took a deep breath. When he let it out, he made a loud hooting sound. He tore out from the brush. Hooting like a silverback, he ran between Annie and the leopard. Jack grabbed the tree limb and shook it. He ripped leaves from branch. He cupped his hands. He beat his chest. Rah! He roared. Rah! Then Jack leaned over and charged back and forth past the leopard. Finally, he threw himself on his belly. He began bashing the ground with his palms. He bashed and bashed and bashed. Jack, Annie called. Jack. Jack looked up. He's gone, Annie said in a quiet voice. The leopard is gone. He left a while ago. Oh, said Jack. He sat up. He pushed his glasses into place. He looked around, then he smiled. Chapter 9. Goodbye, gorillas. Jack couldn't stop smiling. He had scared off a leopard. Boo Boo and Ho-Ho stared at Jack with awe. Annie looked at him with awe too. When did you learn to do that? She asked. Before Jack could answer, he heard a rustling in the brush. The big guy stepped out from the shrubs. The giant gorilla walked silently over to Annie. He took little guy from her and put the baby on his back. Then he touched Annie's cheek gently. Annie grinned at him. Boo Boo and Ho-Ho ran to Big Guy and clung to his legs. The giant gorilla barked at the small ones, directing them to come with them. As he walked past Jack, Big Guy stopped. Ha ha ha, he said in a low voice. He reached out toward Jack. Jack ducked, but the silverback patted him on the head. Then he and the small gorillas moved out of sight. Jack felt as if the top of his head would glow. Wow, he whispered. Did you see what he just did? Yeah, said Annie. He must have watched the show you put on. He was proud of you. Well, he was proud of you too, Jack said modestly. Annie nodded, smiling. I guess it's time to leave now, she said. Leave? Said Jack. We have to say goodbye now, said Annie. Goodbye, said Jack. He didn't want to say goodbye to the gorillas. He loved them. They were totally great. Yeah, Annie said softly. Come on. She led the way back through the shrubs, around the trees, to the clearing. They found all the gorillas awake. Some were stretching and yawning. Others were munching on grass or leaves. The baby was back in his mother's arms. The Boo Boo and Ho-Ho were chattering away to their moms. They are probably telling them what I did, Jack thought. He and Annie walked over to Big Guy and stood in front of him. The other gorillas gathered around. We have to go now, Annie said to all of them. We have to say goodbye, said Jack. Thanks for letting us be part of your family, said Annie. She and Jack held up their hands and waved. The gorillas looked sad. They murmured a soft sound. Big Guy lifted his hand in the air as if he were about to wave, but instead, Silverback raised his thumb, his index finger, and his little finger. I love you, the giant gorilla signed. Jack couldn't believe his eyes. Annie signed back, I love you. Jack signed too. The silverback stared at them for a long moment with a gentle, shy look. Then he turned away and gave a short bark to his family. All the gorillas lined up behind him. The baby's mother held her baby close. Ho-ho rode the piggyback on his mom. Boo Boo held her mom's hand. The silverback started away from the clearing. The others followed. Boo Boo was the only one who looked back. She screeched and waved at Jack and Annie. Then she walked away, out of sight. Jack couldn't talk. His heart was too full. He took a few steps in the direction of the gorillas. Hey, Annie said softly. You're going the wrong way. Jack looked back at her. The treehouse is over there, she said. She pointed in the opposite direction at the treehouse, peeking out from the fog. Jack sighed. Then he turned and started to follow her out of the clearing. Oh, don't forget this, said Annie. She leaned over and picked up Jack's backpack from the grass. She handed it to him. Thanks, he said. They kept walking. And don't forget this, said Annie. She picked up Jack's jacket from under a tree. She handed it to him. Thanks, said Jack. He tied his jacket around his waist. They kept walking. And don't forget these, said Annie. She pointed to the flashlight and umbrella. They lay on the grass under the white, mossy limbs of a fat tree. Annie picked them up and carried them herself. It started to drizzle again just as she and Jack got to the rope ladder. They climbed up into the treehouse. When they got inside, they looked out the window. Jack hoped to catch one last glimpse of the gorilla family, but there was nothing to see. A white mist covered the cloud forest. Annie picked up the Pennsylvania book. She pointed to a picture of Frog Creek woods. I wish we could go home, she said. Suddenly, a joyous screech rang out. Happy wild sound shot through the white mist, through the cool rain, straight into Jack's heart. He opened his mouth to answer the call of the gorillas, but it was too late. The wind began to blow. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still, absolutely still. Chapter 10. A special magic. Tap, tap, tap. Jack opened his eyes. The Frog Creek woods was still dark and rainy. We're home, Annie said. Jack sighed. I miss them already, he said. Me too, said Annie. Did you take a lot of notes on the habits and behavior? Jack shrugged. I listed a few things about them, he said, but sometimes lists don't tell you much. You have to love gorillas to really know them. Yeah, that's right, said Annie. Jack opened his backpack. He pulled out the research book and put it in the corner. Then he pulled out the twig that Ho-Ho had given him. He smiled as he showed it to Annie. I promised Ho-Ho I would eat this later, he said, but I think we should save it for Morgan instead. Good idea, said Annie. It'll prove to her that we found a special magic. Yeah, gorilla magic, said Jack. The magic of all animals, said Annie. Yeah, said Jack. He placed a twig next to the scrolls they had brought back from old England. Let's go, said Annie. She started down. Jack pulled on his backpack. He put the flashlight in his pack. Then he grabbed the umbrella and followed Annie. They started through the Frog Creek woods. It was still cool and dark and rainy. Jack didn't mind though. He didn't put on his jacket. He didn't take out the flashlight. He didn't put up the umbrella. Jack felt as if he wasn't completely human yet. There was still a bit of gorilla left in him. Ho, 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 he said in a low voice. Boo, boo, and he said back. Ho, 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 they said together. The end.